So this video is to help you when you're doing your final sewing up on your bat. So I'm just going to talk right the way through it so you get a good look at the skeleton. So here on the back, you've got the spine, which you do with the bobbles in there, and sew that on first before you then sew your pelvis on the top. Then when it comes to doing the ribs, this is easier, I find, once I've sewn that spine in first, and then I just slip stitch in and put the 3 ribs in position. But a bit of a tip on the bat is it has these large shoulder blades. So I would say to actually sew your shoulder blades in first before you then do the ribs, and that way you'll be able to place your ribs perfectly in the middle between your shoulder blades and your pelvis. So when it comes to making and putting on your wings and your legs, we're going to be using all different bones, and it's a bit like a jigsaw puzzle. So make all your pieces first, and then we're going to lie them out. So we've got 2 short pieces, and in order to avoid minimum having to join in extra yarn and bits and pieces like that, we're actually going to use all the ends that we've got to sew them on. So with your lower bone for your leg, gather the stitches in. So gather your last stitches in like that, and then sew that onto the end that doesn't have an end of the leg. So that way you can use that top one to actually attach it onto the body, sew it onto the end that's your starting ring. Now, I can't emphasise the fact that more stitches would be important when you are putting these together. So don't skimp on actually sewing, over sewing between the 2 pieces when you are attaching the bones in place. And in order to make them nice and strong, just make sure when you're finishing off that end, go around as many stitches as you want. I've been doing 3 or 4 to make sure that if these characters do end up being carried around by their skinny little legs, the fact that you're not going to get any broken bones, they will stay together for their whole lives. Right, so you've got your 2 legs. Now we're going to put the 4 little claws together. So these are the bone tips that go down to the 3 stitches. And with these, the best thing to do is just to take that end again, gather the last stitches like that, and then sew back in, directly in through the point and then out through the blunt end. And if you pull it tight, it will actually curve into a really nice claw shape, especially if we are putting them on like we are here as the toes. So you've got your leg, and then we're going to sew our 4, and you want them to be at a right angle, so not all off the end. You want them to be at a right angle to the bottom of the bone. Don't worry too much, like it doesn't need to be very precise in the way that these are going on. They're obviously have all got lumpy and bumpy ends to them all anyway, so just attach it in nice and firmly. And once you've got a few in, it will become obvious which side you should attach the next ones. So go in and around, and on to the next one. So once you've got all the bones together, snip off all of your ends, and then in terms of sewing it in place, all you need to do is, obviously I've got my first one in already, so position it just beneath the pelvis. You're not going to be joining it to the pelvis, and the bat does have a little tail there, so come just beneath the pelvis and then over sew it into position. And now it's time for the wings. So I've put one in here so that you can see that as I'm putting this second one together. So what you need to do is you've got your long one to the top. Now I've made these ends a little bit short to make it's going to make my life a little bit harder, but I'm going to be sewing that one on, and you want your end to attach it on, which means that this one will then go here, and then you've got your 2 shorts, your long, and then a short that sits beneath that before we then put the tips on. So I'm going to start here first. And what I'm looking to create here is a slight angle. So rather than sewing it in a straight line, I'm going to sew it at a slight angle like that, just so that you get that lovely elbow effectively joint there. And I'm going to sew the whole wing up before I then sew it into place, like we did with the leg. That'll just make it a little bit easier. So that one's in. Then just follow exactly the same process that I did for the legs. So I'm going to gather all of these and sew them all in place. Then once you've got it all sewn together, snip off your ends and then sew it into place. And what I've done is I've attached everything else on first. Then I'm just going to be sewing it onto the top of the shoulder blade. So make sure you've got it the right way up, onto the top of the shoulder blade, but into the neckline. So it's just going to be nicely supported as well. Like that. And then really, if you're making this for a Halloween display, rather than necessarily for a child, I would recommend putting wire into the wings if you want to. So obviously you can't do this if it is a gift for a child at all, because the wire will mean that it becomes an object of display rather than a toy. But if you're looking to just put this little creepy character on your shelf, then you absolutely can add just a piece of wire into those wings that mean that you'll be able to position them as you do. Because what's great about the bat that I absolutely love is you can't necessarily tell what he is until you get out these giant arms as such to see the true span of that wingspan that makes him a bat. So I hope you enjoy making that. On to the next one now. Let's see who's next.